In Algeria, Independence Day is celebrated annually on July 5th. The day marks Algeria's independence from France. The war for independence lasted 8 years, and it was one of the longest and most devastating periods in Algerian history, ending in 1962. On this day, there is a strong sense of unity and cultural pride throughout the festivities. The flag, which is green and white, is flown proudly throughout the country and symbolizes Algeria's freedom. Parades, cultural events and concerts are hosted and well attended by the public. It's International News Desk on Echo Television Africa. Thanks for tuning. My name is Lois Turaki. We begin tonight with NATO to approve accession procedures for Sweden and Finland. The world could do much more, Ukraine's youngest MP says. France deports 51 children, mothers from Syrian camps. Norway's oil and gas workers begins industrial action over pay, affecting output. And Italy declares state of emergency in 5 regions over drought. Member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, are set to approve the consent procedures for Finland and Sweden days after Turkey removed its veto against the historic Nordic expansion. On Monday, the step would clear the way for what is likely to be a long approval process, which must be agreed among the 30 member states. The next move will be the sign by the 2 countries' memberships in the legislative institutions of each member state. Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO will mark one of the major shifts in European security in decades and add more Russia's planned isolation in the wake of its invasion of neighboring Ukraine in February. In spite of the agreement in the military alliance at a summit last week in Madrid, parliamentary approval in member states Turkey could still pose problems for the Nordic duo's final inclusion as members. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan last week cautioned that Ankara could still hinder the process if the 2 countries fail to fully meet its demands to extradite terrorism suspects with connections to outlaw Kurdish groups or the network of an exiled religious leader accused of a failed 2016 coup in Turkey. Sweden and Finland are also anticipated to remove their measures on selling weapons to Turkey. Tuesday's expected signing off by the member state ambassadors and permanent representatives to bring both nations deeper into NATO's fold. They have already attended some meetings as close partners that involve issues that immediately affected them. As officials invitees, they can attend all meetings of the ambassadors, even if they do not yet have any voting rights. Last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned what he described as NATO's imperial ambitions, accusing the alliance of looking to assert its supremacy through the Ukraine conflict. Ex-Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's Russian-backed government crumbled in 2014 after Ukrainians protested against his choice not to sign a political association and free trade agreement with the European Union. Sviatoslav Rush had come back to Ukraine from studying international relations at the University of Calcutta in India to join what became known as the Euromaidan Revolution. Then, just 17 years old, Rush became head of public relations for the activist group Euromaidan. He's the youngest member of parliament, MP in Ukraine, now 26, a member of President Volodymyr Zelensky's servant of the People Party, which he joined in 2019. The MP is quick becoming an iconic figure of the war on social media, with his trademark Vishvanka, traditional Ukrainian embroidery stitch collars adorning his leg line, compared with the reality of war and AK-47 slung across his body. He said, according to reports, what inspired him to join politics and what keeps him and the nation's youth going during a war that is brutally devastating Ukraine. Now, France has deported 35 French children and 16 mothers from camps in the northeast of Syria that keeps family members of suspected ISIS armed group fighters. In a statement on Tuesday, the Foreign Affairs Ministry said the minors were handed over to Child Protection Services, while the mothers will face judicial proceedings. Families and campaigners have long pursued to draw attention to the dilemma of about 200 French children in Kurdish-run camps in Syria after they were neither brought to ISIL territory by their parents or born there during the years of fighting. One of the major and most congested camps is Al-Hol, where malnutrition and disease are common, and almost 2 children die every week on average, according to a report by the Save the Children campaign group last September. It was not immediately clear if any of the 51 currently deported people came from the camp. France had refused to deport people in great numbers until now, arguing that its security concerns were supreme after a sequence of attacks from ISIL fighters, including the November 2015 raids on Paris that left 130 people dead. A disconnected deportation process of French children in Syrian refugee camps has continued since the ISIL group was expatriated from its Syrian base in March 2019. Before Tuesday's operation, France has repatriated 126 children since 2016 under a policy that sought requests analyzed on a slow-moving case-by-case basis. France brought home 10 French children of ISIL fighters from a refugee camp in Syria in June 2020. The Syrian civil war began with peaceful protests against President Bashar al-Assad's rule in March 2011 and advanced into a multi-sided, prolonged conflict that sucked in war powers. The front lines have been mostly frozen for years, but violence is ongoing and millions of people still displaced within Syria's borders. Last month, the United Nations Human Rights Office said that 306,887 civilians had been killed in Syria during the conflict since 2011, about 1.5% of its pre-war population. According to the United Union leading the industrial action, Norwegian offshore workers have started an industrial action that would decrease oil and gas output. The strike, in which workers are clamoring salary increases to recompense for increasing inflation, came on Tuesday amid high oil and gas prices, with supplies of natural gas to Europe especially strict after Russian export cutbacks. Operator Equinor has initiated a shutdown of 3 fields in the North Sea as a result of the industrial action, the company said on Tuesday. The country's labor ministry restated that it was following the conflict closely. It can intercede to bring an end to strike if there are exceptional circumstances. On Tuesday, oil and gas output will be decreased by 89,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day, of which gas output makes up to 27,500, Equinor repeated. On Wednesday, the strike will increase the cut to the country's gas output to a total of 292,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day, or 13% of output, Northern Oil and Gas NOG said on Sunday, in line with Equinor's estimate. Oil output from Wednesday will be cut by 130,000 barrels per day, he said, in accordance with the lobby's prior estimate. The corresponds about 6.5% of Norway's production, according to reports. An additional planned escalation by Saturday could see nearly to a quarter of Norway's gas output short, as well as 15% of its oil production, according to more reports. Consequences of this escalation are not yet clear, Equinor said. It is ultimately the operator's decision to short output. Still, Prime Minister Mario Draghi's office has announced Italy has declared a state of emergency over a worsening drought that has beleaguered 5 northern regions in recent weeks. The cabinet agreed on a state of emergency in Emilia-Romagna, Friuli, Venezia Giulia, Lombardy, Piedmont and Veneto until December 31st, the government said in a statement on Monday, and allocated a €36.5 million, that's $39.5 million fund to support those affected. Italy is facing a strange early heat wave and a lack of rainfall, mostly in the northern agricultural Po Valley, which has been hit by its worst drought in decades. The state of emergency offers extraordinary means and powers to assist guarantee public safety, compensation for losses, while looking to guarantee normal living conditions for those in the area. According to the country's biggest agricultural union, Codereti, the drought threatens over 30% of national agricultural production and half of the farms in the Po Valley where Parma ham is produced. Lakes Maggiore and Garda, located close to Milan between the regions of Piedmont and Lombardy, are also hit by lower than normal water levels for this time of year, while more south the Tiber River, which runs through Rome, also reduced. The Po, the peninsula's largest water reservoir, is extensively used by farmers to irrigate rice paddies, farm fields and grazing land for cows. Recently, numerous municipalities have declared restrictions. Verona, a city of 250,000 people, has regulated the use of drinking water, while Milan has announced the shortening of its decorative fountains. As a result of the drought, hydroelectric power production has dropped sharply. Hydroelectric plants, mostly in the mountainous north of the country, account for closely 20% of national energy production. The emergency declaration came a day after not more than 7 people died after a glacier collapse in the Italian Alps, which Draghi said was without doubt connected to global warming. More stories say scariest floods force fresh evacuations in Australia's Sydney. Several more people in Australia's Sydney have been asked to leave their homes as torrential rains continued to hit the country's east coast, heightening a crisis in a city that has seen at least 3 flood emergencies in a year and a half. Close to 50,000 inhabitants in the state of New South Wales, NSW, most in Sydney's western suburbs, were told to either evacuate on Tuesday or caution they might receive evacuation orders, authorities said. The figure has risen from 32,000 on Monday, with footages showing submerged homes, roads and bridges in the city of 5 million people as emergency crews rescued tons of people stuck in partly submerged vehicles. The floods, heavy rain and powerful winds have also resulted to power cuts for 19,000 homes, officials said. Ample of that damage has been intense in western Sydney, downstream of the Warragamba Dam, which has been forced to spill large volumes of excess water after the region received over 200 millimeters, 7.9 inches of rain in 24 hours. The deluge is over 17% of the city's annual average, according to the Bureau of Meteorology. On Monday, July 4th, 2022, a house is semi-submerged in flood waters near Richmond on the outskirts of Sydney, Australia. More than 30,000 residents of Sydney and its surrounds have been told to evacuate or prepare to abandon their homes on Monday as Australia's major city prepares for what could be its worst flooding in 18 months. The federal government has declared a natural disaster in 23 flooded regions in NSW, unlocking relief payments to stricken residents quicker than usual. Many people affected have lived through successive East Coast floods that hit in 2021 and then again in March and April this year. The March flood killed 20 people and caused damage estimated about 4.8 billion Australian dollars, that's $3.3 billion. In Africa, 60 years on, Algeria's fight for independence. French colonial rule in Algeria lasted 132 years, beginning in 1830 with the incursion of the capital Algiers, and lasted until the War for Independence, which ended with the signing of the Evian Accords in March 1962. The agreement marked the end of a bitter war between 1954 and 1962. Up to 1.5 million Algerians are believed to have died. French forces suppressed any form of resistance, especially those fighting for independence, known as Mujahideen. The torture methods the French used in Algeria are well documented, with France admitting in 2018 that it carried out systematic torture in its previous colony in an effort to crack down on the independence movement. A poster in Algeria during the War of Independence says France says the French considered Algeria to be an administrative part of France and not a colony. Zora Drif was one of those who fought against the French and remembers the torture well. France's 2018 acknowledgement that torture was practiced in Algeria marked a change in the French government dealings with the realities of the colonial period. For many years, several families were deceived about what happened to their relatives during the war. The death of Ali Boumendjel, for example, an Algerian independence fighter, was recorded as suicide until 2000 when Paul Assessores, the former head of French intelligence during the Battle of Algiers, admitted to ordering Boumendjel's murder and concealing it as a suicide. In March 2021, during a meeting with Boumendjel's grandchildren, Emmanuel Macron, French president, admitted that Ali Boumendjel did not commit suicide. He was tortured and then killed. In spite of that, Macron has said France will issue no repentance, no apologies for the abuses it committed against the Algerian populace throughout the colonial period and the war for independence. The subject has long been a taboo subject in French society, tracing back to the time of war when the French government censored newspapers, books and films that claimed that torture had been used against Algerians. Al-Burhan, Sudan's military leader, paves the way towards civilian rule. On Monday, Sudan's top general broadcast that the armed forces would step away from government in a bid to solve the political catastrophe. Coup leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, in a televised speech broadcast on Monday, said the army will make way for a civilian government. I call on the various components of the people, especially the youth, to adhere to peace. Everyone has the right to express their opinion, and your sacrifices are appreciated, and your hopes for a democratic transition are fulfilled. Your armed forces will not stand in its way, said General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Sudan's coup leader. Since last year's coup, that the United Nations and other regional blocs have tried to negotiate a way out of the political deadlock. Monday's announcement came after 5 days of peaceful sit-ins by pro-democracy groups. This sit-in continues. It is unlimited. People will continue to come and will reach 10,000 or 20,000 people before the Eid holiday. Afterwards, tomorrow, we will continue. They will attack us as they did by dispersing the demonstrators in front of the army headquarters. Our sit-ins are silent selections. Here, everyone expresses their opinion peacefully, more than in a demonstration where there is always violence, grenades. Here, it's different. We gather, we meet, we eat, we drink, we laugh, we discuss what we want to happen, added a young male demonstrator whose identity was withheld. Burhan assured to dissolve the ruling council but did not give specific dates or who would substitute the military at the negotiating table. Still, Mali responds to removing sanctions by ECOWAS. Malians have exhibited hope and joy at the choice of Regional Bloc Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS to remove the sanctions enforced on Mali's military regime. West African leaders acknowledged on Sunday a March 2024 plan to return to civilian rule. Mali experienced coup in August 2020 and May 2021. It's a great joy for all of us, for the society, because our economy had deteriorated. I think that with the opening of the borders, there will be advancement for everyone, for operators, for carriers, said Abdoulaye Touré, company manager for Africa Tours Trans. The sanctions have badly hit the landlocked Sahel state, whose economy is already under severe strain from a decade-long jihadist insurgency. Retail trader Ali Balo said the more the transport increases in price, the more the products increase in price too. If the price of gasoline goes down, it will also reduce our prices because they are all transported. And today, with this lifting, even if the price of fuel does not drop, it will not affect the price of products. After months of meetings, last week Mali approved a plan to hold presidential elections in February 2024. On Sunday, ECOWAS also agreed to permit Burkina Faso 2 years for its transition to democracy. And finally, Somalia cautions of looming food shortages. The effects of the war in Ukraine continue to be felt across the world. According to a statement on food security published by the White House last week, the Horn of Africa is particularly vulnerable. Prior to the conflict, Somalia imported 90% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. In the capital, Mogadishu, food stocks made available by international donors have been decreased. Shafichi Ali Ahmed, storeroom manager at Peace and Development Action, supported by the United Nations World Food Programme, said the burden of food shortages is directly related to the fact that the world has turned its back on Somalia to focus on Ukraine. Most of the aid to Somalia came from the West, but now their attention and aid has been diverted to Ukraine. This is of great concern as the prospect of hunger emerged large in Somalia. A huge part of the country is also affected by drought labeled as the worst in decades. Yemen, Syria, Iraq, South Sudan, Congo, and the Palestinian territories are equally affected by decreases in food support. A major recap of our stories: NATO to approve accession procedures for Sweden and Finland. The world could do much more, Ukraine's youngest MP say. France deports 51 children and mothers from Syrian camps. Norway's oil and gas workers begins industrial action over pay affecting output. And Italy declares state of emergency in 5 regions over drought. This is International News Desk. I am Lois Rueki. Have a good evening.